I'd like to return back to the analogy of congresspersons because I really believe this is how we should view team policy debate, as a real-world policy measure. And so I would like to inform you first about the information and the dangers of using only federal courts, as opposed to having discretion at using which one to use, as well as the lack of information provided by the affirmative team through three main voting issues. Bringing you back to the idea that we should be viewing this debate on through the lens of national security, because that is the entire reason why we have these terrorists in the first place. The first main voting issue is not a significant reform. Not a significant reform. Now, both sides agree that the affirmative team does not have any numbers on how many people would be affected by their plan. Both sides agree that the affirmative team does not know how many people are currently in Guantanamo Bay. Both sides agree that the affirmative team does not know how many people would even be affected. Now, if you were a congressperson, would you actually pass a policy if you didn't even know how many people it was even affecting? You wouldn't. Now, the affirmative team claimed that these numbers do not exist. However, that is not true. These numbers do exist under the Department of Justice. It's just that we have to subpoena the Department of Justice to get these numbers. And since this is a real-world policy debate, we should be emulating the real world. First, at the very least, even if you agree with everything they say, first get these numbers. Then we can have a more informed policy discussion about how significant of a reform this is, how significant of an advantage it would be, and how significant the cost would be. This is everything because it tells us the extent of the affirmative team's reform. We would not pass a policy with good conscience without these numbers in the real world. U.S. policymakers deserve to have full information available to you so you can make a prudent decision. The second main voting issue we have for you is that of national security undermined. National security undermined. And I have a couple of subpoints. The first main subpoint I have for you is actually one that was not addressed, and that is of a threat in U.S. prisons. A threat in U.S. prisons. Under the affirmative team's plan, all of the masterminds of 9/11, all of the masterminds who've done these terrorists would be in U.S. prisons with normal U.S. criminals. This is an extremely bad idea. We do not want the masterminds of 9/11, many of which who have PhDs in Islamic theology and radical Islam, to be conversing with U.S. prisoners and telling them about how great Islam is, because they will convert to radical Islam and become a further threat for the United States. We provided an example in the 1NC of a U.S. prisoner who converted to Islam and after he released became a national security threat. This was not refuted by the affirmative team. I'd also like to point out that we have discretion in the status quo. It's not arbitrary, it's simply discretion, because we can choose when to prosecute someone in a federal court and when to prosecute them in a military commission based on what's best for the national security of the United States. The officials making this determination are the ones who have access to our intelligence, and they know what decision is in the best national security interest of the affirmative team. Now, the only proof that the affirmative team had that it's arbitrary and that they're not getting their just desserts was based on one example. The only piece of evidence that they have saying that they're not getting their just desserts and it's arbitrary was one example. And this one example was when we made a mistake. So sure, our federal government can make a mistake in determining where to prosecute them. But that doesn't prove that overall we shouldn't have discretion. But the next main point is that of classified information. Classified information. Now, the affirmative team said that this was mere speculation. This, however, it is true it's speculation in that it is the opinions of people who work at George Washington University Law School. But my next point is this doesn't matter because of the discretion in the status quo. The reason why we haven't seen any problems in the status quo is precisely because if there is a national security threat in terms of classified information, we can try them in military commissions, not federal courts. So that's why it's speculation. They're saying we don't know what would happen if we tried them all in federal courts because of the fact that this has never been done before. Also, they said that it's not military commissions aren't better. Military commissions aren't better because they're not subject to the Constitution. They're not subject to the Constitution. So they do not have to give 9/11 terrorists full constitutional protections, meaning that they do not have to provide exculpatory evidence. Where in federal courts, regardless of whether it's a terrorist or not, they have to protect that terrorist's constitutional rights and provide them with exculpatory evidence. And the evidence that logic I read never was responded to, that even under SIPA, it could still be a national security threat. And even if you think there's a small risk of a national security threat, this in and of itself outweighs their case. Which brings me to my third and final voting issue, which is that of no tangible harm. I'd like to quickly respond to international cooperation. Their evidence never said that we didn't have international cooperation. We still cooperated with them because we were willing to put them in federal courts. So we are not losing international cooperation in the status quo. It still exists. And for all of these reasons, there's no tangible harm, and the tangible risks of the Affirmative Teams Plan outweigh their benefits.